Hi, my name is Cody Miller. I'm the Director of Choral Activities at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Thank you so much for having me here today. And I love the opportunity to share with you a little bit about musical maps and how we can use those in the classroom. I know several of the people who are working with this conference and really excited to be presenting for you all. So I'm going to share my screen here for you. Go in, here we go. So today I'd love to talk to you about musical maps. Are we there yet? These are all about rehearsal planning and programming strategies and how we can best plan our rehearsals that will lead us to a successful concert. I have a background in this and was introduced to this concept during my master's degree, which I earned at Baylor University. And I struggled at times to plan my rehearsals in a way that would get us to the right place at the right time, and looking at that as the concert. And so my teacher and I kind of sat down and worked through this idea, and it's an idea that he learned from Don Newen, former director at UCLA. And it proved to be very helpful to me in ensuring that the concerts were successful. So that's a little bit of my background with it. And I've used it with middle school choirs, with high school choirs, with my community groups and church groups. And I found that there are certain strategies that work best if you're in a middle school or high school, and other strategies that work best if you have a community choir that only meets one day a week. And I think those are a little bit different, but that the principle behind it is the same. So let's go on to the next slide here. So the problem, I think part of our problem, and I know this, I'm speaking from experience, is going into those concert weeks hoping that our choirs do well. And therefore moving blindly through our long-term rehearsals, and then you get to the concert and you realize, we don't know this piece as well as we should, or there are transitions in this piece that they can't sing, or there are these moments where we fall apart, or we can do it, but we can only do it sometimes. It depends on the day. And I imagine, some of you have probably been in that position, and I know I certainly have. And I first experienced this as a new teacher. I was teaching in Ohio very briefly, and working with some chamber groups at the high school that I graduated from. And I was teaching them this piece, and I had totally, I think, first of all, overestimated the kind of difficulty that they could accomplish in a solo and ensemble season. But then I did not rehearse the transitions much. I would rehearse the chunks and just do each chunk on its own, but I wouldn't practice that transition from one to the next. And we got to 2 weeks beforehand, and as we were like, okay, let's run it, they couldn't do it. They couldn't make it through the transitions. All those spots were unfamiliar enough that the piece just fell apart. And I definitely had a lesson I learned from that, which is, for one, rehearse the transitions. I think as new teachers, we often get into those situations and we don't really understand how we got there. And I know that was true for me. And the student teachers I work with at UW Stevens Point, I think sometimes see the same kind of thing, where the process seems simple when we're students, and then once we actually get in front of an ensemble, that becomes a little bit more complicated, and the complexity challenges us in ways we didn't predict. So a couple of strategies. I mentioned this a bit in the previous slide. One is rehearsing those transitions. Transitions are those spots where we're most likely to fall apart. It's the sections that we are probably least likely to rehearse and drill, but the place where the seams of the music happen. Often I find that if we're talking about in the middle of a phrase, or in the middle of a section of music, like an A section or a B section, there are parts where maybe a choir even, or a section, starts to to come apart a bit, but they can jump back in. The issue is on those transitionary periods where if they can't get in, then sometimes they're going to sit out for measures. And so those transitions are really important. So I've gotten in the habit of, if we've got an A section and a B section, and then let's say another A section, that when we're rehearsing, if we're finishing up the A section, that we just keep going and then we start and we get a measure or so into B, and then we'll stop. So that every time they're getting used to going from one section to the next. Another general strategy, being musical from the very beginning, building in those musical concepts, and so that as we teach notes and rhythms, they're getting that musicality ingrained in them and they're used to making music at a higher level. I think it's tempting for us sometimes, and I know I speak for myself in this too, tempting to like, we're just going to drill the notes and rhythms right now. We're just going to drill intonation. And if we do that for too long and we let music go for wait too long to introduce musical concepts, that those musical concepts sometimes won't actually embed themselves into the music, and it results in kind of plain Jane performances. So that's something we can do from the beginning, is trying to introduce those musical concepts. Another idea is that the choir must be memorized roughly 2 weeks before a concert. This ensures ample time to make music when the notes and rhythms are no longer a concern. This was an idea I took from my high school choir director. And the example he gave to me was, like, for instance, for their winter concert, let's say it's in the second week of December, like it is probably for many of us, that his policy was, if the music wasn't memorized by Thanksgiving break, if a piece wasn't memorized by Thanksgiving break, then that piece would be dropped. And I thought that was a really interesting way to come about that. And when asking him, what his philosophy was behind that, it really was less so that he would actually drop the piece of music, but more so to push them to get it memorized so that in those 2 weeks after break, they can just work on refining it, making it really musical, cleaning up all those finer details. But that when we accommodate for that, when we allow time for that to happen in the rehearsal and we plan for it, these 2 weeks are devoted to this. We're not going to be worried about notes and rhythms because it's going to be memorized. Then it just polishes up our performances a lot. Let's go to the next slide. So a big part of this is picking the right repertoire. A challenge in and of itself, and something that you can spend hours and hours and hours searching and trying to find the right piece for your choir. And it's a real difficulty. And I think, depending on what level you're at, what level your choir is, it can be even more challenging if you feel like you're sifting through repertoire that isn't really well written for the voices. But nevertheless, it is a big responsibility for us, and often determines the success of our concerts. So I would recommend balancing the difficulty. If, for instance, 3 songs, if you have 3 songs, pick one that's challenging, one moderate, one easy, so that they get one at each level. And then I gave a couple other examples you'll see here. Number 4, if you have 4 songs, 1 challenging, 2 moderate, 1 easy. That's just an example. 1 challenging, 2 moderate, 2 easy for 5, and then 2 challenging, 2 moderate, 2 easy for 6. The idea here is that we don't overprogram, that we don't overburden them with challenging repertoire. If this were an interactive session, if I could sit here and talk to you face to face, which is I would love to do, and I hope to get back to in the next year or so once we're past COVID, is that this easy repertoire allows us to make music from the very beginning. It's something that they're going to be able to sight read really quickly. It could be unison. I often program unison with my university choirs, especially at the beginning of the year. And the things that we work on that unison piece from the very beginning are tone, beautiful tone, good unification of sound, an agreement on vowels and vibrato and color, those types of things, that we can shape the music from the very beginning. So for instance, I think not last year, but the year before, pre-COVID, we started with Thee We Adore, a chant. And yeah, we just worked on those qualities at the very first rehearsal because it was all unison and they could read it in a second. That moderate piece, obviously, that's right in their strike zone for them. That's something they can do. And then the challenging piece, picking that piece that will challenge them in the areas that you want them to be challenged. If you want them to challenge themselves with language, maybe picking something in French or German, or if it's challenging in terms of divisi, something like that. It's also good to keep in mind that when we do pick a challenging piece, that we try not to pick a piece that has too many challenging aspects to it. So for instance, I mean, I'm sure this is all something that you do anyway. What I'm thinking of is challenging your choir by picking that French piece that splits into 12 parts, and the middle section is atonal. Probably too many different difficult layers there, but maybe one or two of those could work. The idea here is that we're preventing that over programming, which I think is probably where we all lean towards. And I think we maybe expect to see that, or think that others expect to see that, other choir directors expect to see that in our performances, that we're performing the most difficult music possible. But I really don't think that's the purpose of what we're here for, and I think you would probably agree with that. It's really about the students and educating them and making music with them and making them feel successful and trying to make them the best choir possible. And I think this is best achieved through this blended, challenging, moderate, easy strategy. In the end, our goal here, our choirs are singing musically and they're singing well. A couple of scheduling considerations. These are all ideas just as we start to think about rehearsal planning. How are we wanting to structure our rehearsals? Both daily, but long-term as well. What are we thinking about? Think about breaks. Where's that Thanksgiving break? Which days are they out? Are they out sooner than that? If you're at the university level, are they, even though break starts on Wednesday, are you going to have half your choir gone on Tuesday because they're out, they're leaving, or whatever that may be. Tests, standardized or AP tests, like if we're thinking spring break or something like that, even if we have that spring break blocked off, are there 2 days on either side of that spring break that we only have half of our choir and no seniors because of standardized tests? Musicals, many of you are probably already involved in your musicals, but that's something else to keep in mind. Athletic events, you probably share your students with other programs like athletics and musicals, and it's important to know those in advance. Often we can work with those people, with the coaches, with the other conductors, the other music directors, to share our students and have them attend their games and then our rehearsals and our concerts and whatnot. But it also helps to know just in advance. I don't know about you, but one of the things that's really frustrating and hard for me is when I'm surprised that something has happened. So I've planned for a rehearsal to happen and it's the day before, and I have students that say, oh, hey, by the way, I've got a game tomorrow, I can't make it. And I'm like, I needed to know that like last week. So knowing and seeking those things out in advance will help make this whole rehearsal strategy and the whole rehearsal planning go a lot smoother when you're prepared. Hey, I'm going to miss some juniors and seniors, or that bass I have that's also the quarterback on the football team, he's going to be out this day because they're traveling away. So I know I'm going to take it easy on the basses that day. We're going to actually work this section that's mostly SA or whatever that may be. Lastly, field trips, senior service trips, it's the same kind of thing. Just things to look out for, things to be looking ahead for as we start to plan. So let's talk a bit about planning for these long-term rehearsals. I think we essentially have two options, or at least that's what I've come up with so far. Maybe I'll find a third soon. Two options that I see that I tend to use are mapping out each minute for the entirety of a concert cycle versus planning checkpoints along a cycle. And what I mean by cycle is just maybe the time you're rehearsing up until a given concert. So maybe the 6 weeks that you have before your fall concert, for instance. So we have these two strategies. The one that I see most often is mapping out each minute in terms of what I see in textbooks. But I think this checkpoint idea or benchmarks is another good strategy. Let's look at option one, mapping out each minute. The idea here is that every single piece that you're rehearsing over the course of that cycle will get a number for minutes that you will devote to it in rehearsal. And every single minute of every rehearsal will be accounted for. So you're gonna, basically how you do this is you start by listing your repertoire and then plan how much each piece will receive in total time throughout the cycle. I tend to use easy as a 1, moderate as 2, and challenging 3 as labels. The second thing is tally your total rehearsal time. So that's where you're going, okay, I've got 48 minutes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I've got 54 minutes on Thursday, and then I'm back to 48 on Friday or something. And I've got all of these weeks. I've got 6 weeks of that. So that's, 6 times that total number for the week, except I have this senior service trips. I'm going to take out some time there. And there are musical auditions, and I'm going to take it easy on them that day because I know a bunch of them are auditioning for the musical. So I'm going to take some time off there. That's where those scheduling considerations will come in. But anyway, you're going to tally up your total time. And third, divide it. Divide it between each piece. I think it can be really daunting to try to determine when you're looking at these figures, when you're looking at figures like 320 minutes for a piece, to think about what does that actually look like and feel like. That's not really how we think most of the time. But so a good way to start, I think, is just dividing evenly between each piece and then separating from there. So for instance, that moderate piece, let's say the average is 300 minutes. That the moderate piece, we're going to leave at 300 minutes. The challenging piece needs more time. The easy piece needs less. Let's say we only need 250 for the easy. So we're going to give that extra 50 minutes to the challenging. So we've got 250, 300, 350. I also tend to look at that in terms of hours. So I'll say, however many hours that is. What is that, like 4 hours? Can I teach this easy piece to my choir from start to finish? I think I can do that in about 4 hours over the course of a month. And it really helps once you start looking at the challenging piece. Can I teach this French atonal polyphonic piece in 450 minutes? No, I cannot do it. I need more time. Or can I teach it in 5 hours? No, it would take an hour just to learn the French. And that's before we've even looked at notes and rhythms, or whatever that may be. Here's an example of what this might look like. This is a condensed version. This was a concert that I did a couple of years ago, and I think it serves as a good example for us. So I created this, I believe in Google Docs, or maybe at that time it was even in Pages, or whatever Apple's product is, or it might be Excel. I'm not quite sure, but either way, it's in one of those spreadsheets. So what I did is, didn't mean to do that. What I did is I listed each rehearsal we had, and we only had a few rehearsals. This was a quick run concert with some with some grad students and people who can read music pretty quickly. But nevertheless, because we were a really short time frame, I wanted to make sure, can we actually learn all the music we're supposed to learn in the short amount of time we have? So what I did is listed out each day, figured out how many minutes I had per rehearsal, which it was about 120 here, 60, 120, 60. That must have been 105 or so, 55, 60, around there. So for each one of those. So that's the total time. And I think I made this to tally up what this figure is. So these add up to this. Total time is 575 minutes. And essentially what I did is what I just told you all to do. And that is I took out each piece, divided by the total time. And I think the average I came out with was around 45 minutes. You'll see that pretty often. There are pieces that are harder or more challenging. I gave those more time. There are pieces like this Regina Celli Movement 2 by Mozart is really short, and the choir doesn't sing a whole lot in there. And so 20 minutes. But our total available time here is 600 minutes. Basically, all of that adds up, and we have 45 minutes or so a song. Then what I did is started in that first rehearsal, how much time were we going to spend on each piece? And I worked through rehearsal by rehearsal. As you can see, I tended to front load it. So the first time they saw a piece, we tended to spend more time on it. And as we went along, we rehearsed more pieces for less minutes, which over the long scope of things is kind of how we're going to rehearse at most levels, with the exception of maybe middle school and high school, and I'll come back to that. But certainly for church choirs, for community choirs that only meet once a week or so, or if you're on a shortened time frame, if you've got a group together and you've got 5 rehearsals for a special project, this kind of thing works really well. I think this minute by minute. I think I read in Stephen Seek's book, Rehearsing the Choir, that Joe Michael Scheibe at USC does this kind of plan for his choir, but they also meet for an hour and 45 minutes or something for 2 days a week. So he doesn't have many rehearsals with them. I think this is a great strategy for planning that out and making sure, hey, can I teach this Cantate Domino in 45 minutes in 5 rehearsals, doing 15 minutes here, then 10, skip a day, 10, 5, and 5. But that's the overall idea. For those middle school and high school programs that I taught in, I found that this was a bit more difficult to work with. I didn't find as much success in it. And so I created a second option, which kind of goes off the first and incorporates some ideas that I've already mentioned so far, and that is creating benchmarks. For instance, the memorization date. Having benchmarks set up throughout a concert cycle. Basically, what we do is that we work backwards, beginning at the concert, and then create benchmarks working backwards for memorization date, the date that they can sing through the piece, the date that they can sing it with the language, for instance, when the notes and rhythms will be learned, etc. Whatever you might have. If it's a piece that has a lot of different sections, maybe that's built out by section. Like, hey, we need to learn pages 9 through 12 by this time, and 2 through 6 by this time. It can be whatever you choose. But what you'll learn, I think, for all of you who've been teaching for even just a little while, who know your kids pretty well, that as you start working backwards, you're gonna look at it and say, ooh, we can't get from we know the notes and rhythms and the language, but can we memorize it? We can't do that in 3 days, or we can't do that in 5 days. We need more time. And so basically by working backwards, you're going to push your dates back and back. And at some point, what you may realize is, I actually don't think I have enough time to teach this piece as is. I either need to switch an easy piece out for an easier piece, or I need to switch this one to something a little less challenging. But whatever it is, this isn't going to work. Or the alternative thing that can happen is that we really dig into that easy piece and make it super beautiful, and we don't leave enough time to work on the challenging piece. So this benchmark approach, I think, is really helpful. I'm going to see what the next slide is. Yeah, I'm going to jump back for 1 second here. The minute-by-minute approach can be helpful, though, while you're working within each benchmark. I think that's where it can be helpful. I found it too daunting to actually do a minute by minute over the course of 6 weeks, when like my middle school choir was only working on 3 songs at a time and we rehearsed every song every day. It just didn't make sense to me. This made more sense, but what you can do is, once you have this, you can say like, listen, we've got 70 minutes of rehearsal on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or that's a little light. Maybe it's 100. And we need to learn pages 1 through 6 by then. And so, I don't know, 15 minutes a page or something like that. 20 minutes a page, whatever that is. But that's something I would suggest, kind of, maybe you can try incorporating that. As I touched on this, I think option 1 is best for those limited rehearsal times, 1 to 3 rehearsals a week, maybe, shortened concert time frames where you've got something in 3 weeks or something. Community choirs, church choirs, all those, I think, fit nicely to this minute-by-minute approach, where you're mapping out every single rehearsal from the very beginning. Before rehearsals start, you're mapping out every single rehearsal. And that option 2 is best for those ensembles that meet daily and have extended time to rehearse before a concert. So my university choir, my top choir at UW Stevens Point, they meet 5 days a week for 50 minutes. And I find the benchmark approach to be really helpful for me to know, this is what I'm shooting for by next week, by next Friday. Today's Monday. By next Friday, I need to have them to this place. And we've got to get there. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Let's talk about these individual rehearsals. So once you have this large roadmap for the entire concert cycle, we start to look at those individual rehearsals. These are a couple strategies that I picked up through reading and through school, and just, my mentors, and sitting in and singing with directors who were pretty incredible. And I observing the things that they did and they talked about and they wrote about. Generally good to start with something that the choir is familiar with, that they can be successful at quickly. Putting those pieces that require the most effort towards the middle. These are probably things that you're already doing, but sometimes it can be good to be reminded of that. Finishing rehearsal with the song the choir enjoys, something that they like to sing, so that when they leave, it's on a positive note. And then avoiding too many long pieces in any one rehearsal. So thinking of, if you've got 60 minutes of rehearsal time, maybe don't do rehearse only 2 pieces for 30 minutes. That can obviously wear them out and kill their focus a bit. Structuring each individual rehearsal. So after each rehearsal, if we think about ourselves in the forest, in this large rehearsal plan over the course of many weeks, these individual rehearsals are little stepping stones along the way and give us an opportunity to reassess where the choir is at the end of each rehearsal. And what I do is, after that rehearsal, I go into my plan and I'll say, we spent, I know we said we were only going to spend 15 minutes on Cantate Domino, but they were in it and we worked on it and we did good work. We actually spent 25 minutes. So I'm going to take a little bit of time off that tomorrow. We're supposed to rehearse it for 15 minutes again. Let's only do 10. And the piece that we shortchanged today, they need a little bit more time on, so we're going to do that tomorrow. And that way, basically, you're adjusting your calendar as you go. This process, I'll tell you in advance, and be totally upfront with you, it's time consuming. It takes a long time to prepare a whole cycle of music from before the choir ever starts. A whole cycle of rehearsals and how many minutes each piece gets. It's very time consuming. However, it does decrease a lot of stress during the year, and it requires a lot less work. I find myself far more comfortable and easy going into rehearsal each day because I already have a plan. I just look at my plan. The plan's done. And I change it. I change it pretty often. I'll go in and I'll move stuff around. But it's a lot easier to alter a plan than it is to try to create one every single day. So I would highly recommend you experiment with this before your school starts this fall. I don't know when Virginia, DC, Maryland school starts, but hopefully you've got a little bit of time where you could play around with this. And if it's too daunting, maybe try to experiment with it for the first couple of weeks of the fall, but then maybe start planning for the winter. But I would encourage you, just whatever format you can manage, experiment with it and see if you like it. So I'll take any questions and be happy to answer anything that you might have. These kinds of sessions are really great when we can sit and chat and I can hear your ideas about what you like and what you found as a teacher and bounce ideas off of each other. And these are just some of the ideas that I've come across, that I've employed and found success with, that have addressed my own I don't want to say failures, but missteps as a director, those times where I've tried something and messed it up. In the rehearsal planning scope of things, this has been really successful, and I encourage you all to use it. If you do have any questions, this is my email here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. You might not be able to, but it's cody.miller@uwsp.edu. I would love to reach out and talk to each and every one of you. And yeah, I hope you're doing well and look forward to talking again. Bye, everyone.